The laughter came first. That sharp, careless sound cut through the quiet of the living room and landed on my skin like cold water. Margaret's voice followed, steady and commanding, telling me to make lunch for the guests and clean up after the kids. Daniel stood beside her, one hand resting on the doorframe, smiling as if this were a normal part of marriage. I could smell the faint scent of his aftershave mixed with the wet dirt on the children's shoes. The air felt heavy with noise, with orders, with everything that wasn't love. My hands tightened around the vacuum handle until the hum of the motor drowned out my own heartbeat. One of the children dragged sticky fingers across the glass table I had polished that morning. Margaret laughed again, the sound echoing off the cream walls, then tossed a look at me as if I were an employee who had fallen behind. Daniel nodded in agreement, his eyes already sliding toward his phone. Detached. Easy. I glanced at the wristwatch on my arm, the one I bought years ago with an $85,000 bonus. Back then, it had felt like proof that I could build something on my own. Now it only marked the hours I spent cleaning up after other people's choices. The laughter kept going, but something inside me went quiet. It wasn't the mess that hurt. I realized how cheap my silence had become. There was a time when my name meant something. Back then, my email signature carried the title Marketing Manager, and my annual salary of $120,000 felt like proof that I mattered. I led campaigns for tech startups, flew to San Francisco for meetings, and once earned an $85,000 bonus for a product launch that went viral. My condo in Seattle was small but bright, worth $380,000, and every inch of it was mine. When Daniel and I got married, selling that place felt like building a future together. I told myself the new house in Denver would be our shared beginning, not realizing the deed would list only his name. The first signs came quietly. Margaret began dropping by with ideas about the curtains, the dishes, even what meals would impress Daniel's colleagues. I let her, thinking it was harmless. But every suggestion became a rule, every visit an inspection. She filled the pantry with her favorite brands and scolded me for wasting money on organic groceries. She called our guest room her space, then started inviting her friends over without asking. Daniel said she just meant well, that it was easier not to argue. I believed him until I noticed he never defended me, not once. The more I tried to please them, the smaller I felt. My laptop gathered dust. My business suits hung like ghosts in the closet. The woman who once closed six-figure deals now ironed napkins before dinner. One evening, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. Hair pulled back, apron on, eyes dull from exhaustion. I didn't look like a partner or a wife. I looked like an employee no one paid, working a job I never applied for. Saturday started with the sound of small feet pounding against the stairs. 6 children burst into the living room like a storm, their laughter turning the air heavy. Margaret stood in the doorway, waving her hands as if she were directing a play, telling me to bring snacks, wipe the counters, and make sure the little ones didn't ruin the rug. Daniel laughed at something on his phone, glancing up only to say, "I should relax and let the kids have fun." I watched orange juice spill across the white table I had just polished and listened to the hum of the vacuum still running in the corner. The noise felt unreal, like I was standing outside my own body. A boy knocked over a vase, another smeared chocolate on the wall, and Margaret said, "Not to worry, I could clean it later." I turned to her voice and caught Daniel smiling in quiet agreement, his approval of her authority louder than any insult. My hand tightened around the dish towel. The fibers cut into my skin, but I didn't move. The air conditioner buzzed. The vacuum whined. I stayed still long enough to feel something inside me settle. Daniel looked at me and laughed again, asking why I was so tense. He said if I couldn't handle it, maybe I should leave. The words slipped out of him without thought, careless and light, but they landed hard, exact, final. I set the towel down, wiped my hands on my jeans, and stood up. The vacuum kept humming behind me, but its sound no longer belonged to me. The house was still loud, but none of it reached me anymore. I walked upstairs, past the laughter, past the sound of another glass hitting the floor, and into the bedroom that had once felt like mine. The air smelled faintly of detergent and perfume, the familiar mix of control and routine. I opened the closet, pulled out the gray suitcase, and began to pack. My laptop slid in first, then my planner, medications, and a small folder containing the bank documents for the account I had quietly kept. $42,000, untouched since before the wedding, waiting for a moment like this. Daniel's voice floated up the stairs, still light, still amused. He thought I was sulking, maybe making a point I would eventually drop. I folded a sweater and placed it carefully on top, listening to the rhythm of the zipper closing. When I lifted the suitcase, it felt lighter than I expected, like it carried only what truly mattered. The sound of my steps on the hardwood was steady, almost soothing. Daniel appeared in the doorway, his smile half-formed until he saw the suitcase. He asked what I was doing, his tone wavering between disbelief and irritation. I told him I was doing exactly what he said. He laughed again, a short, nervous sound that didn't quite land. His eyes searched for the woman who would back down, but she wasn't there anymore. I walked past him, down the stairs, through the chaos, and out the front door. The wheels of the suitcase clicked over the tile, each sound measured, final. The cool air outside met my face, clean and still. For the first time in years, the silence around me felt like authority. The train to Oregon felt longer than it was. I sat by the window and watched the landscape shift from flat highways to green hills and mist. My phone stayed silent in my bag. When the train stopped, my parents were waiting on the platform, both older than I remembered but somehow stronger too. My mother's eyes filled before she said anything. My father just reached for my suitcase and nodded toward the car. There was no lecture. No need to explain, only the quiet sound of home. At the house, my mother handed me a blanket and asked if I wanted soup or toast. I hadn't realized how long it had been since anyone offered me something without expecting a favor in return. The couch smelled faintly of lemon polish, the same as when I was a kid. I fell asleep that night to the hum of the refrigerator, the kind of ordinary noise that asks nothing of you. For the first time in years, I slept without waiting for footsteps or criticism. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I made a list of what I still owned. The Denver house, worth about $900,000, $75,000 in joint savings, and Daniel's company shares valued at around $400,000. The numbers didn't comfort me, but they reminded me of structure, something that could be rebuilt. I decided to hire a lawyer, not for revenge, for order, for dignity. When I met with Ms. Carter later that week, she asked what outcome I wanted. I told her I wanted everything to make sense again. She smiled and said that it was possible. As I left her office, I realized justice didn't sound like revenge anymore. It sounded like an order returning to my life. The weeks that followed were quiet, almost methodical. I filled folders with screenshots, emails, and text messages that once made me feel small. Grocery lists Margaret had sent, receipts I had paid with my own card, even a recording of Daniel telling me to do what his mother said. I labeled everything by date and topic, not out of spite, but precision. When I brought the files to Ms. Carter, she took her time flipping through them. She was steady, the kind of woman who had seen too many versions of the same story. She finally looked up and said the case was strong. Her tone carried no excitement, only certainty. The first time Daniel called, it was late afternoon. He sounded panicked. He said the kids had destroyed the house, that Margaret had slipped and hurt her hip, that everything was falling apart. I listened in silence, the way I used to when he scolded me, but this time the silence felt like control. He asked me to come back, said he needed me. I told him he had made that impossible. He tried again, his voice cracking, and I ended the call before he could finish. The sound of the dial tone felt clean. When it was time to sign the divorce papers, we met at a notary's office in Denver. The table smelled of paper and coffee. I handed him the documents, then slid the diamond ring worth $5,000 across the surface. He stared at it as if it held answers. I told him forgiveness didn't mean return. Ms. Carter passed me a pen. The ink moved steadily under my hand, one signature after another. Each line felt lighter than the last. Justice didn't need noise, it needed completion. Portland felt like a place made for starting over. I rented a small apartment downtown, one bedroom with a balcony that caught the morning light. $1,800 a month felt expensive, but freedom always costs something. I used part of the $237,000 from the divorce settlement to furnish it simply: a desk by the window, a coffee pot that brewed just enough for one person, and a plant I hoped I wouldn't kill. The rest I set aside for an idea that had been growing quietly inside me since the day I left. I called it Northlight Branding. A small agency built for people like me, the ones who lost their voices in places that once felt safe. I hired 2 women I met through a local support group, both survivors of manipulation in their own homes. Together, we built campaigns for small businesses and nonprofits that wanted honest storytelling instead of noise. Our motto was simple: we don't sell perfection, we rebuild voices. 3 months later, a sustainable fashion startup offered us a $40,000 contract. I remember reading the email and sitting still for a long time, not out of disbelief, but quiet pride. The company name on the agreement said Evelyn Hart, not Bennett. Signing it felt like standing upright after years of being bent. The rhythm of work returned, and with it, a steady confidence I thought was gone for good. Every morning, I opened my laptop and felt the same pulse I once had at 25, the one that came from building something real. The name on the screen was mine again, and for the first time, so was the story attached to it. A year passed quietly. News reached me through a neighbor who still lived near the old house. Daniel had sold it at a $60,000 loss after the mortgage and repairs became too much. His business collapsed when a major client withdrew, leaving him with debt and no backup plan. He and Margaret moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment outside the city. She was recovering from another fall, and he had taken a job managing inventory at a warehouse. I read the message twice before closing my laptop. There was no satisfaction, no hidden joy, only a kind of still understanding that the balance of things eventually restores itself. The life I had left behind had simply run out of room to hide its truth. Later that evening, I sent a short message to Daniel. I wished him peace and told him to take care of his mother. Nothing more. Afterward, I stood by the window, watching the light fade over the river. Justice no longer felt like victory. It felt like quiet alignment, like breathing evenly again after a long climb. Peace, I realized, was not about everyone treating you right. It was about never losing yourself again while they tried. I wrote in my journal tonight about silence. There are 2 kinds, I realized. The first hides pain, the kind that swallows words so others can stay comfortable. The second guards peace, the kind that protects what you have rebuilt with care. I used to live in the first one, afraid that speaking up would cost me love. Now I live in the second, where stillness feels like strength, not surrender. The life I have now is smaller, quieter, and truer. Every morning, I open the window and feel the air move through the room, light and unforced. It reminds me that peace was never given to me. I had to claim it. Looking back, I see that dignity isn't loud or dramatic. It's the steady choice to stand by your own worth. If this story reminded you of that truth, stay with me. Choose dignity, choose integrity. Subscribe for stories that honor both.